Oh, this is JC. I know I said I was going to wait a while, and I have waited a while. I've got a few very nice comments on my new book entitled Todd. I didn't want to seem too monotonous to anybody, so I made a change in my clothing attire. I got my cowboy hat on. I got my little cowboy neckerchief on there. I didn't look very good, but what the hey, it's better none at all, I guess. And the rest of my clothes are kind of dark, like maybe Lash LaRue or the Durango Kid or somebody like that, some mysterious person. Anyhow, I just was sitting around thinking about this book and wondering what was going to happen next. And frankly, I guess I must be my own best fan because I just couldn't stand not knowing what was going to happen next. So, anyhow, to make a long story short, I went ahead and wrote chapter 9, and I'll read it to you now. As you recall, in chapter 8, Todd and Les had met in the park, and they had some very, very serious emotional discussions, and they came to some conclusions that I thought worked out very well for them. So anyhow, I'm going to pick it up from there, and this will be part 2 of the book named Todd, and this is chapter 9, and I'll start now. Todd and Les smiled a lot as they walked back to their cars. When they got there, Todd hugged Les and kissed her gently. "Thank you for understanding," he said. She just smiled. Les became serious then. She wanted to meet Todd's mom and wanted Todd to meet her parents, but she realized this wouldn't be a good time. She asked Todd if he thought she could come over tomorrow. He agreed she should. He suggested she bring some kind of food. He knew his Aunt Lola would, and thought this a good idea. Then she looked into Todd's eyes as if looking for something, some unanswered question. Todd shook his head slightly and said, "I don't quite know how to feel. I'm sad about Dad dying, but I'm not sure if it's enough. In some ways, I didn't know him very well. I was never involved in the business and most of his personal things. If I relied on either Mom or Dad, it was more Mom. I mostly just stayed busy within myself." "My God," said Les, "will you always know what I'm thinking?" "Would you like that?" "No?" "Then no, I won't." Les pulled Todd to herself and kissed him. "Good night, little boy." "Good night, little girl," said Todd. When Todd got home, he put his ear to his mom's door and heard only very soft, shallow breathing. He knew she was still asleep, and he went to bed and went right to sleep. The next day started early, and Betsy feared it would be very hectic, with guests and all. She went into the kitchen and started a pot of coffee. This time, she didn't sit and wait for it to perk. Todd and his mother were already up and dressed. She sort of anxious about today and what it might bring in the way of opinions as to why this had happened the way it did. Betsy was still struggling with this, how her husband could have been so depressed that he was take his own life. She mentioned it to Todd and he reassured her if Dad had it to do over, he wouldn't have done it. He reminded her of what her husband said about being careful to not let things overwhelm him, that he realized his mistake as soon as he pulled the trigger, but of course it was too late by then. And Todd also reminded his mom that the last words Dad uttered were, "Theodore, give my sweet Betsy Lee a hug and a kiss for me, and tell her I love her." "But he should have stayed here with me, taken care of me. Damn him anyway. What am I going to do now, Todd? What am I going to do?" She broke down and sobbed on her son's shoulder. Todd sat her on the sofa and sat beside her and held her while she cried. He tried to reassure her. "It'll be all right, Mom." But he knew it wouldn't be all right, not for a long time. Never as all right as it would be if this hadn't happened, if his father were still here. Soon Betsy cried herself out. She kissed Todd's cheek and, pulling away from him, smiled a little smile. "I guess I've done all the crying I can for now. Thank you, baby." Aunt Lola arrived first of the mourners, and she cried and hugged Betsy, and they they told each other what a good man Bobby had been. Aunt Lola was a spinster, never having married and of course had no children. Aunt Lola had always been very partial to Todd. She saw in him great things for the future, and sometimes she jokingly called him Mr. President Todd. Todd said hello to his aunt and hugged her. Then she sent him to her car to bring in food dishes she had prepared. He made 2 trips with 5 dishes. Todd had eaten his aunt's cooking and hoped someone else would also bring something. With no husband or family of her own and no one for whom to cook, she had also no incentive to make more than bland meals. Spices were not primary in her kitchen. It was past 10 o'clock now, and people, mostly close friends, were beginning to arrive. There would not be very many coming. There were no more relatives in town, or within a close enough distance to warrant coming here. Betsy sat on the sofa, or helped Aunt Lola in the kitchen, and Todd watched for visitors and greeted them at the door. Each expressed their condolences and sympathy for the loss of Bobby. No one mentioned the cause of his death. No one except Aunt Lola, and she discreetly, only to Todd or Betsy. Todd heard a knock at the door and saw an unfamiliar couple at the door. Todd heard a knock and saw an unfamiliar couple at the door. He opened it and saw Les just to one side. He smiled. "Please come in." They entered and Les said, "Todd, these are my parents, George and Carla Foley." Todd shook hands with each and told them he was very happy to meet them. And he showed them where to sit. "Mom's in the kitchen," he said. "I'll get her." Leslie was standing by Todd, and suddenly she grabbed him and pulled him to her and hugged him. He put his arms around her, surprised by this. Then Leslie began to cry, sobbing and saying over and over, "Oh, Todd, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Her mother, obviously confused by her daughter's actions, arose and went to her side and began, "Leslie, honey." Todd said, "It's all right, Mrs. Foley. I'll take care of her." And he set her on the sofa and sat beside her and held her to him. In a moment, Les stopped sobbing and looked up at Todd. He handed her his handkerchief and moved her hair back from her cheeks. "Here, little girl," he said, "your eyes are leaking." In spite of herself, Les could not suppress a grin. She dabbed the hanky at her eyes and her nose. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't know what came over me." "Don't worry about it, my dear girl," said Todd. "That cry was for both of us." And this is the end of Chapter 9, Part 2, the book I named Todd. This is JC. Thank you very much.